throw something into the wild and say good luck. You have to have an evidence base. We are the only mental health chatbot anywhere in the world to have secured Class 2 medical device approval. It's a bit the Wild West in digital health. And so you can release something in the App Store, and there are thousands of them, which are these wellness solutions designed to make people feel a bit better. That is not clinical. There is no evidence base. There is no regulatory defensibility. There is no integration into the clinical workflow. I think it is an ethical and moral imperative that we figure out a way to safely and compliantly integrate AI into the care pathway, because it is only through AI and automation that you will scale limited clinicians to meet the needs of the many.
Hey everyone, delighted to be joined by Ross Harper, CEO, founder of Limbic. Second time you've been on the podcast, Ross. The first time, we were just looking, weren't we? 2019. How many years? I don't even want to say out loud how many years ago that was. But I tell you what, still here as a health tech company. What is it, 6 years later? That's pretty good going, man. How have the last 6 years been?
They've been good. It's a different time, 2019. Pre-pandemic, obviously.
Yeah.
We went through a pandemic since we last spoke, so hope you're right. Hope that was good.
Yeah.
But it's when I spoke to you last, we would have been gearing up to launch, and now we have been in market for 5 years.
Awesome. And obviously, I will have got your story from last time, but if people didn't want to go back to episode, I think 72, 75, something along those lines, if they didn't want to go back and listen to it, what's the short version?
We build AI for mental health care. We are a clinical AI rather than a wellness AI. And we deploy within clinical settings to amplify the supply of trained mental health professionals so that we can actually meet the astronomical number of patients who actually require mental health care. So launched here in the UK in 2020, a good year to launch a tech solution in the NHS. And now we are used by 45% of the UK's NHS talking therapies.
Wow.
Yeah, really pleased with that. We are approaching 500,000 unique patients who have used the AI as part of routine. And it does everything from intake, triage, diagnostic support, and then actually supporting on cognitive behavioral therapy.
Amazing. So, you said some killer words there: diagnostic and treatment. Those are, well, what would have been incredibly bold things to say until, I guess, quite recently, when we've started to now get AI regulated. And what a time to be in healthcare. Now, for people that have been listening to this podcast for a little while, they will know that I've been on a bit of a journey with my own understanding of AI, and I've tried to be as sort of intellectually honest and emotionally honest as possible of sort of how I felt as we've kind of gone through the fact that AI exists in its machine learning capacity, then as large language models, and then large language models now being applied to healthcare in lots of different ways. The frontline nature of large language, I'm going to say large language models for now, and feel free to correct me of exactly what your technology is doing. But large language models being applied for diagnosis and particularly mental health treatment has been a scary thing for me to battle with. And I think that's because of what was initially quite a binary nature to the conversation of, you have a chatbot that's delivering mental health therapy, and now that's what's going to happen. And in my mind, I'm like, oh God, there's now this like slippery slope to like, we're no longer ever going to have a human. It's just going to be AI because it's just going to be so economically favorable, all that kind of stuff. And I've sort of come around to the idea of it being a lot more nuanced. And one of the most important arguments, to use your words, the astronomically high number of people that require mental health therapy. It cannot be ignored. And I think I did a keynote in Australia about this, and I was sort of explaining that the conversation in my own mind went from a place of can you live with yourself if AI is delivering therapy to can you live with yourself if it's not?
Mm.
And I think that it's. I just want to get your take on this because you're doing this. It's doing intake. It's doing splitting this into clinical and non-clinical. You're doing some non-clinical stuff with it, and you're doing the clinical stuff with it. And 500,000 patients is incredible work, man. So congratulations, first of all. But talk me through kind of that constellation of stuff and where you sit on all of that stuff, because clearly you're pioneering this, man.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, look, there's a lot to unpack there. So maybe I'll just start talking, loose stream of consciousness, and you can nudge
Let's do it.
into the direction.
And I appreciate you're jet lagged as well. I can see you in your Koesler Ventures quarter zip. So I know you've been out in the US. So
I don't have any clean clothes to do some laundry. I got back.
It is a sad state when you get to the merch part of your laundry. You're like, oh god.
I was on the west coast of the US for 6 weeks. I just got back a couple of days ago. So
oh, nice.
I was saying to you before this began, apologies if I'm a little bit foggy, but I will do my best. So clinical AI. I mean, first let's just get some definitions in place. If it is used to support patients in treatment in a clinical healthcare context, and it is primarily focused on a clinical function and driving patient outcomes, it is a clinical tool, it is clinical AI, and it therefore must meet a very high bar for quality evidence and patient safety. That bar typically means a long list of peer-reviewed papers that demonstrate efficacy, just like any other clinical solution. If you think about drug development, you can't just throw something into the wild and say good luck. You have to have an evidence base. You also likely need to have approvals and accreditations on information governance, data privacy. For us, Limbic, we are a medical device. We are regulated as a medical device. We are the only mental health chatbot anywhere in the world to have secured Class 2 medical device approval, which means we are really able to take a degree of responsibility for patient outcomes as part of care. So that is a world apart from just a wellness chatbot, right? So different from we made an app, we called it a coach or a therapist, and there's not really very much policing on what you can and can't say. It's a bit the Wild West in digital health. And so you can release something in the App Store, and there are thousands of them, which are these wellness solutions designed to make people feel a bit better in a consumer context. That is not clinical. There is no evidence base. There is no regulatory defensibility. There is no integration into the clinical workflow. That's what makes it clinical AI. And you can't use Limbic if you're just a general consumer. You use it if you are a patient.
Have you struggled to separate yourself from the wellness chatbots to people that matter? I mean, mainly I'm thinking there people like investors and things like that. Like, what's been the overall kind of education of people?
Yeah, we had to do it more and more. Like most things, it's getting easier and easier with time. But most investors didn't get it a few years ago. They were unable to see past a consumer wellness solution and a clinical grade AI. And that's just the nature of things. Very few investors are actually courageous and effective at predicting the future. The ones that are hyper valuable, and they really are, I think, contributing to building the future. But the vast majority of investors are risk averse, and they want to follow. They want it to be as proven as possible, and that means their thinking lags behind the frontier. But you're right, both for investors and potential clients and partners, we really had to do an education piece around
Mm,
why this is very different. And really, it comes down to acknowledging that there is something very special about the way mental health care is delivered in a clinical setting. It is so powerful and it helps so many people. But the biggest problem with it is there are not enough trained mental health professionals alive on the planet.
yeah.
And then we get back to your point, about whether we should or shouldn't do this. With hundreds of millions of people with a diagnosable mental health condition currently going without care, I think it is an ethical and moral imperative that we figure out a way to
Mm,
safely and compliantly integrate AI into the care pathway, because it is only through AI and automation that you will scale limited clinicians to meet the needs
mm,
of the many. And if you don't do this, and we aren't brave and we don't challenge ourselves to change the status quo, nothing will change, and hundreds of millions of people will continue to go without support. And that's not a world
mm.
that I want to live in.
In terms of how your technology works, then specifically, I guess where does it fit into the clinical pathway? You've mentioned it can span quite a lot of it, but I guess specifically where is each part fitting in? And what is the technology behind it? So let's get technical on that element and start to split some hairs of exactly what's going on here.
The sort of patient experience would be without us, without Limbic. If
Yeah.
you want to access a therapist here in the UK, you would typically call a phone number or go onto a website and try and get access to one of the therapy clinics within the NHS. They're called talking therapy services. More often than not, if you phone, the call will ring out or you'll go to voicemail. If you're lucky, you'll get hold of somebody straight away, and then they'll take some basic information and they'll get back to you with an assessment session with a clinician. You can typically wait many months for that session, and then when you have it, a mental health professional will talk you through, kind of do an interview. It's like a therapeutic interview, and they will try and figure out what your primary presenting issue is so that they can get you onto the right treatment pathway, and then treatment can begin. And then you have a series of therapy sessions, maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and hopefully you get to a point where you recover. That's kind of the flow. There is a lot of waiting, and there is a lot of just due to supply constraints. There is a lot of people who will either be on a waiting list indefinitely or don't actually have anybody pick up the call when they first call in.
When you say indefinitely, are we really talking indefinitely?
It can span anywhere from 2 months to over a year in the UK.
Oh,
And if you're struggling with depression, which typically comes with low motivation, your help-seeking behavior is transient, and very often off
mm,
the waiting list and then come back, and so they just kind of get stuck in this cycle. Also, sometimes, very commonly, you will see symptoms deteriorate while you're waiting, and people that get into a crisis, they may self-harm, and you'll find them in the emergency department rather than where they should have been. Yeah.
mm,
So at Limbic, we said that's not good enough. There are ways to deploy AI safely to solve for this. So the first experience that a patient might have is when they reach out for support, they're greeted by our AI, either over the phone, it can speak now, or on a text-based chatbot on a website, right? And then that does intake and triage all in one go. So it employs statistical reasoning to identify the likely issue and then book that patient in directly onto their treatment pathway, completely, saving a bunch of time, both administrative and clinical, in those first few
mm.
steps.
And just a quick question on that, Ross. Do you does that AI tell the person it's an AI?
Oh yeah,
It does. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, you have to. If you're misleading people, that's unethical, and
So yeah.
so you have to tell them. What's more interesting isn't, should we tell them? Of course, it would be unethical not to. What's
Mm,
more interesting is if you use the latest in language modeling, the fact that you tell them you're an AI does not change their experience very much. So we ran some studies. Let me tell you this. This is super.
interesting.
Yeah, we ran the largest study of its kind, 130,000 patients in the sample size. And
Yeah.
these are patients, not users. These are people who were in treatment.
Okay.
Okay, so this was a clinical study, 130,000 patients across multiple sites in the UK. And we found that patients are very aware they are talking to an AI, but they still rate the AI as incredibly empathetic, engaged,
Mm,
and this was the best finding for almost all minority demographics, ethnic, sexual, gender, all minority demographics saw a statistically significant uplift in self referrals into care when there was an AI from Limbic at the front door rather than it was just human led acquisition channels. Does that make sense?
it does.
The fact that there was an AI at the front door lowered the friction to seeking support and materially changed things across demographics, but particularly for minority groups. And James, I said, look, we've got to find out what's going on here. It's not enough to just empirically have the finding.
Do you know what I was literally about to say? What does that tell us about the humans more than what does it tell us about the AI? Like that's a frightening statistic to come across, right? Without acting on it.
I think it's a marriage of human and AI. I am not an advocate for substituting humans with AI because I think there are strengths to each. But in this particular case, it really shone a light on the power of AI to drive healthcare equity and income.
Mm,
And what we found when we spoke to these different demographic groups and we conducted interviews was that Limbic was seen as empathetic and engaging, even though they knew it was an AI.
mm.
But because it's an AI, it doesn't have its own demographic identity. And therefore, it could not clash with the identity of the individual seeking support. So typically what you will find is we have a heavy skew in the clinician panel to white ethnic identity. And
Mhm.
if you are someone from a different demographic background, it is already known that there is a friction to
Mm,
opening up and engaging and feeling represented by the individual you are speaking to. And so that friction point translates into challenges around accessing support. By removing the human at the very first step and making it a non-judgmental, empathetic AI, you actually saw a statistically significant increase in referrals because you removed the friction point. And I just thought that was such a powerful finding because so much of media attention goes towards the risks of AI in furthering
mm,
social inequality. And that is absolutely a risk that must have attention paid to it. But what
mm.
people don't talk about is that done correctly, done responsibly, AI can actually level the playing field and really solve for problems that currently cannot be solved for with just human resource.
I love that I'm learning so much here, mate. That's absolutely incredible. So, one word I just want to highlight here is the word friction, because what I don't want people to go away with is the, I guess, the notion that you're suggesting any kind of organizational or structural racism or anything like that, although the connotation is perhaps there. It's, I guess, with it's difficult to explain, but it's a statistical friction, I guess.
It isn't, yes.
Is it? Or that's a
Let
question.
me clarify. Um, So obviously, as you pointed out, I'm not commenting on the any sort of institutional racism. That is not the point. The point is that it is already known in the data that individuals from minority backgrounds are not seeking support for mental health as much as they should be, as much as the prevalence of the disorders in the population.
Mm.
So we need
Which I assume is due to a lot of
a
different
variety of
factors,
things.
language barrier
And
and fear and
exactly, potentially different degrees of social stigma, but in different
yeah.
communities. There's a
Okay.
bunch there. But the empirical data is saying that we are not seeing as many individuals from minority backgrounds seeking support. They are underrepresented. And one of the known issues is that there is a demographic mismatch between the individuals seeking support and the individuals providing care, just due to the
Yeah.
representation of different backgrounds in clinical service. And it is already known, outside of Limbic, it is just a known thing in the literature that the mismatch between and patients not feeling represented by the clinicians available to them
Mm.
problem. It creates a friction point around getting started on an already hard first step to actually, seeking support.
Yeah.
And so you can remove that challenge by getting rid of
Wow.
the demographic identity. See, most people have tried to solve this problem by getting clinicians to match the identity of the
Yes.
individuals seeking support,
Yes.
which is very challenging. That
Yes.
becomes a recruitment challenge, and
Mm.
the funnel of trained clinicians becomes a limiting factor there. But
Yes.
actually, a solution that maybe no one predicted, but is absolutely true in this study we found, is that you can actually solve for this by removing any demographic identity because it's an AI and it doesn't have an identity.
Wow. And a stupid question. The voice of the AI,
Mm.
how do you I assume you go for like a neutrality there? Like how is there any thought behind that? I
Yeah.
assume there is.
Yeah, it's something we're trying to figure out as we go. I think
Yeah.
there are loads of directions and creative ways you can
Yeah.
improve, but initially, just a neutral voice gets you pretty far.
Yeah.
And the sky's the limit on where we can go from here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, apologies for how detailed and nuanced I'm going here, but the reason for it is because I don't get to ask these questions to someone who's built mental health chatbot AI that's actually delivering it to 500,000 people, and so I know that there are so many answers in here for the blueprint of how we do this at scale, because the devil is in the detail. The devil is in the nuance of quite rightly not going binary. What I used to say, AI should not be placed at the point in suffering alone, to now going, I can't live with myself actually saying that out loud anymore. Like the devil's in the detail of like, what's the actual model of doing this, and things like what voice is it, what how does it sound, like does it declare it's AI? These are the points that actually matter if we're going to be able to use this at scale. So being able to actually talk to someone that's figured this out academically with research is amazing. So we're at step one of your whole patient journey here. We've taken a while, so I'll try not to interrupt you for the rest of it. But yeah, talk me through the rest of that patient experience before we then move on to the tech.
Yeah. So I mean, let's talk about the tech in tandem because the product
Cool,
is
perfect.
tech. So many AI companies are not AI companies. I'd say 99%. They are companies that are either using AI as a marketing buzzword to gain interest, or they are applying AI that was developed by others and just wrapping it up into a product. And that just makes you, at best, it's part of your tech stack. To do this right, beyond clinical evidence and regulatory approval, which we've done, you also need to have AI scientists who are trying to use AI for clinical purposes. So we've got, I think, 10 PhDs in AI on our team. We
Wow.
really we look like a research institute. rather than
Wow.
we're saying we use AI. And they are developing the systems in the background that make this technology safe and effective. So, to put that in concrete terms, at that front door, yeah, you're speaking to this language model which is very empathetic and engaging and very clever, but behind the scenes, other AI, which has been trained on clinical data, is predicting the diagnosis, which is predictive AI working behind the scenes. So you've got different types, right? You've got language modeling, but then you've got clinical predictive AI, kind of the
Mm,
brain of this system, behind the scenes, trying to figure out what you, James, might be presenting with based on everything that.
mm,
And this is really important because previously, or maybe some other solutions I've seen in the space, they're all very rules based. They're very like, if this,
yeah.
but the benefit
Okay.
that AI gives you is it can merge multiple different types of information and come up with a very accurate and very precise guess that has been proven as, you know, uh,
Mm,
very, very powerful in clinical papers that we've published. Like way better
mm,
than a rules-based system, way better. Because it's
mm,
able to integrate all these different information streams to come up with a precise and quantifiable estimate. And
mm,
so that is working in tandem with a language model to try and identify what your issue is and get you booked into the right pathway as soon as possible. And we published another paper with 65,000 patients in the sample, which showed that there is a 45% reduction in care pathway changes for patients that access care through Limbic versus traditional channels. And
okay.
if I try and sort of give you the
Yeah.
conclusion, what that means is typically individuals will access care, they will receive a clinical assessment, and then they will go on to a treatment pathway. But that process isn't perfect, and often
No.
you will find that patients will be on a depression pathway, but actually, after 3 sessions with a therapist, it becomes obvious that they should really be receiving treatment for social phobia. And what originally
Huh.
looked like depression because they were staying indoors and not going out actually turns out that social phobia is the correct treatment pathway because really they are struggling primarily with being around other people.
So this is a metric of efficiency of resource.
It's a metric of whether or not that initial assessment was correct or not
Yeah.
when it's
Yeah.
done by a human clinician. And I'm very bullish on human clinicians. I really admire and believe in this limited resource that we have. But how can we expect them to be right 100% of the time when they are so overburdened and overstretched and just trying to deal with the volumes? So what Limbic showed was by having our AI use the diagnostic model behind the scenes to make the prediction and be very accurate there, pathway changes downstream decrease by 45%.
It also doesn't stop a hybrid model at that point. Focusing on diagnosis now as well, it certainly doesn't prohibit, thinking of a utopian future. It does not prohibit the human being the face, the one in front of the patient with the AI working in the background. It's just that at this point in time, we also need the AI there.
It's a marriage. I think it is so simplistic and naive to think that AI will replace human clinicians. But I think what it will do is it will scale them to 100 or 1000x. I think the way you think about that playing out in practice is, right now you already have a staffing pyramid. You've got maybe a psychiatrist at the top of a care team. Maybe you've got some psychologists. Maybe you've got a few more CBT therapists or licensed clinical social
Mm,
workers. You've got a different number of all these different roles.
yeah.
And then you should just think of a clinical AI like Limbic as the final base layer of the staffing pyramid, but it is infinitely large. You'll never need another.
Mm,
And the job of these
yeah.
AI agents is to go out and do a lot of the heavy lift, but they are overseen and supervised by clinicians. And I think it's that marriage, which means the original clinical supply is going to 1000x.
Yes. 45% reduction in pathway changes is an amazing statistic. Because as you quite rightly say, that is a statistic of, getting it right first time. But I do also just want to make the point about that's basically half the time that you're not having to start again and repeat the resource. So even if you said, and it wasn't an AI that was going to actually do the diet, but even if you just went into an organization and said, by the way, for those half of times you get it wrong, that you're then struggling to actually diagnose them, the treatment's not working, you're trying something different, and then eventually you hit it at we can remove all of that. That's an incredibly compelling argument for anyone and anywhere in healthcare. Like that's an incredible argument to A, save resource, and B, get it right for the patient first time, because let's not forget there's a patient at the end of all of that as well, which I admire was the first thing that you went to. I think the resource part of the conversation, though, also does have to be brought in here, that my goodness, let alone everything downstream, but just that part, being able to change that for the healthcare industry is an incredible financial argument, right? And in a resource-constrained place where we're struggling for humans, you're actually just creating an extra, 20, 30, 40, like the capacity that you're even releasing there is incredibly important.
Yes, exactly. And this is, again, what makes us different from just a consumer app in the App Store. We are integrated into the care pathway so that we can generate service-level efficiencies, which you can't do with a standalone app. So Limbic is integrated into the electronic health record, and we are part of the care pathway, so we can make these improvements. But you're quite right, James. All of this, we can have the best intentions in the world, but at the end of the day, healthcare, you need to think of it as a business, or at least think about the economic component of delivering care, and you have to find ways to improve margin so that services can do more with less. And that's where most of our go-to-market thinking revolved. It was, yes, like step one, can we build a clinical solution that actually makes patients healthy? And then at step two, can we find a way to integrate this into the healthcare industry such that it creates economic value and we have a business?
Absolutely. It's one of the areas that I think we struggle with in healthcare a lot, isn't it, talking about money? But it's interesting because no one's, well, in the UK anyway, public healthcare system, let's simplify it. No one's here to make profit. We're just trying to save money so it can be spent everywhere else. It's just that money's an analog for resource.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't actually worry about talking about money. We are really, you could call it tokens, you could call it energy coins, you could call it literally resource coins. It's just that it happens to be money, which is what we also take home to spend on things. It's just that it could be completely different. It's a resource conversation.
You can't get away from talking about money. And we need to just be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversation. But you have to talk about money because we have a fixed budget for healthcare. And we need to deploy that sensibly so that everybody gets the highest quality care. Right now, everybody does not get the highest quality care, right? We have problems around supply and demand. So you have to think about how to spend the pounds, the GBP, sensibly so that you can make it stretch. And AI is a phenomenal way to do this. One of the things that I find so troubling is that we need to be faster. The healthcare industry, and I consider myself part of it, just a very, very specific pocket, but we need to be faster at thinking creatively on how to stretch budgets so that they can go further. A maddening conversation I had recently, and I won't name names, but I was speaking to somebody extremely senior deploying NHS budgets. And I asked, what is the biggest problem that you have? And they said, we don't have enough staff. And we can't recruit more because there isn't a sufficient pool of clinicians to recruit from. And I said, that sounds like a really hard problem.
Mm.
And they said, we've now been given a very large budget to solve this problem. And I said, what ways are you thinking about solving it? And they said, we're going to spend that money on recruitment. But I said, you don't have enough. You just told me you don't have people to recruit.
They don't exist. Yeah.
I said, what about generating the equivalent of full-time staff using sensible technology and solving your problem that way? And they said, completely convinced, but the budget has been allocated for recruitment.
Yeah.
So the budget gets allocated for a very specific method of solving the problem, not towards solving the problem more generally. And they know ahead of time that the method of solving the problem won't work. And it's this, nobody is at fault, but just system-wide, there is this recursive fallacy around how we actually solve the biggest problems in healthcare. And I just feel that, responsible, clinically evidenced, regulated AI should be nationally available. There should be national tenders out for this right now. And I'm not saying we should do it without care or thought or recklessly, but we could easily define these are the criteria. It needs to be a regulated medical device, and it needs to have had the MHRA come in and audit everything they do. That's one requirement. It needs to have demonstrable peer-reviewed evidence that it creates outcomes. Great. That's another thing that we should absolutely be asking for. It needs to have many years demonstrating efficacy within the intended environment. I mean, you can be as prescriptive as you want on what the criteria are, but there should be nationally available sort of tenders for AI to solve the staffing crisis in the NHS.
Yeah, I think the difference there, Ross, is that you have a vision for it, and I think what lacks nationally is a vision for that for those technologies to slot into. We don't know what we're aiming for. I think what Limbic have done, what you have done, leading Limbic, is that you've set out a clinical pathway of excellence that is safe, that is effective, that has morality built into it, that has all sorts of good stuff built into it, right? In terms of it works, and it works in the way that you want it to work, which is a reflection of your morality and ability, frankly, in order to understand what's happening on that side, this side, the other side, and what's possible, whilst maintaining a view of what's going on technology to keep it updated. Don't overlook the fact that you're not the majority there in that, and that there's like a floodgates potential thing of like AI being deployed absolutely everywhere, doing absolutely everything under no fixed vision, and it all gets a bit chaotic. Now, I think that's probably still slightly better than what we have going on now. It's just that what I'd really be advocating for is for people like you, if not you personally, to actually have a role in defining this, albeit conflicts of interest aside, because the way that you've explained what you want mental health care provision to look like in a world of AI, I tell you, it's not the norm, man. It's not the norm, because like as you know the amount of apps that are just skinning ChatGPT and going out there doing all this stuff. You know the bad actors because they appear every now and again as your competitors. You've seen this, you know this, and so I just don't know how we do that. I don't know where the national vision comes from. That then we go, yeah, okay, here is the nuance. You must make sure you declare it's AI at the beginning of the phone call. You must make sure that it's a neutral voice. You must make sure that But now let's go bullish. Like we don't want it here. We don't want it there. Stay away from that. We're ring fencing those. That's human only. We're not there. But let's go bullish everywhere else. Where does that vision come from? Because I think we can all be bullish underneath that vision.
I agree, and there are different levels of bullishness, if we're going with that phrase. But I think, James, you can devolve responsibility for figuring out what is appropriate by going with the trusted process for how we do that with everything else. With pharma.
Okay, yeah, fair.
I don't say, oh well, just because we're saying that we need to make available SSRIs for depression and anxiety.
That they're given to everyone.
Exactly. Like we don't
Mm,
say, oh, but that means that everybody will be bringing to market products that are untested and unsafe. Because we say
yeah.
no, we absolutely. If you want to come to market and you want to be in this space, you're going to need a deep clinical evidence base. You're going to need to have conducted trials, and you're going to need to have had the authority, the regulatory body, find you to be the claims you make have been validated and verified.
Mm,
But then, isn't that enough? Like, why must we always have another layer of uh, evaluation? Don't we just say let these
yeah.
institutions um, go through the process of validating claims and making sure it's all good?
Mm,
And then, if the claim suits the problem or the solution suits the problem, why are we then still so nervous about rolling it out? I think that's
mm,
like, one of the challenges I have found is at every regulatory hurdle we have jumped through, I always thought, and now there is no reason why it isn't used 100%, you know? But you still like there's still some sort of like skepticism, and you're like, what do I need to show to reduce that? And I think it's that people still feel that they all need to do their own evaluations. And
yeah.
to get together as a community and say this evaluation is sufficient, and there should be a national tender that just says if you want to be a serious contender, then you need to have been found worthy by these trusted institutions that we now put responsibility on to evaluate. Do you not think that
Yeah.
that's the solution, or?
I do. No, I do. I do, and that sort of answers my question of where does that national vision come from? Because I think that then becomes a framework
Yeah.
of like, okay, if this organization, this group of people, I used to call it a common sense committee that they need. They need a common sense committee that is people that can make a decision in the room, and they get together and they just make a decision in the room, and it just removes a lot of stuff. But if they're able to set that, okay, now this information governance has been done for Guys and Sir Thomas's, therefore it is fine in Kings and Barts and blah, blah, blah. Can we all just relax like it's fine? The people that set that then also probably set, well, here's where we are comfortable with AI and here's where we are comfortable with it being human only, and that can change, but this is where we are now. Let's go, pedal down on this model and then review it in 3 months. Like, that seems like an appropriate model. I just don't know where that comes from. But before I go too much into rabbit hole, I know we got you for a few more minutes. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 on this, by the way, because I'm going to finish off on diagnosis and then I'm going to get you back on to talk about treatment, because I think that's a whole other thing that I want to talk about. But with diagnosis, so the language model and the predictive model are working together in this diagnostic component of what Limbic does, this sort of two-way dance between the two in order to arrive at the diagnosis. Is this being done? This is being delivered still by the AI in voice, right? So that's a question. So are the questions being formulated in response to the answers? Is this a moving model as this diagnosis is emerging? And then my last question on diagnosis really is then, how, again, super practically, how is that diagnosis then delivered to the patient?
To do AI right in healthcare, you definitely don't want a language model implicitly making decisions. It's not ready. And even if it was performant, it's very hard to quantify the error rate and sort of hold it accountable. There are too many degrees of freedom with the language models. They're 175 billion parameter models. So you just can't do it. What they are very good at is holding a naturalistic and engaging conversation. They are very good at that. So you need to disentangle any clinical reasoning from just the ability to talk. And that's why we have behind the scenes this specialist cognitive architecture that we call the limbic layer, which is doing diagnostics, but it's doing a bunch of other things as well. And
Right.
is designed to do clinical reasoning. It is not a language model. It is a statistical system. It is predictive AI. It is more like traditional machine learning, where you've seen image classifiers in radiography, and it's not a language model, it's statistical predictive AI. And then you let the language model, whether it's voice or whether it's text, it doesn't matter, it's just a different medium. You let that hold the conversation and collect information, and then you pass that through to the clinical reasoning system that has been specialist trained for this job and this job alone, and has a known error rate, and you can quantify the profile, and you can publish papers, and you can get it approved, and then you let that make decisions that then just get relayed through a language model. But you never let the language model make the decisions. You must dissociate those two functions because they are different roles.
Have you guys become okay then with the AI actually delivering that diagnosis to the patient? So the AI itself is telling the patient what it thinks they have and that side of things?
No, that's a product decision, not a technical decision. And you basically just need to figure out what's appropriate. And what we settled with our NHS partners is you would never you never have the AI say, James, you have depression.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's too much. And you definitely want to have clinician oversight. So what happens is, I believe, in the current product incarnate, is that the AI would say, James, it sounds like you might benefit from some help with these symptoms of low mood. That would be a compliant way to talk about it. Do you mind if I book you in with a clinician who's going to talk more about that and get you to that? And so then we would relay you onto a clinician, but we've massively leapfrogged a lot of steps. We've freed up staff time in the back end. We've got you the help you need at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday morning when you were at the peak of your help-seeking behavior. And now you are in the process. Now you are going to get the support that you need. And the clinician will have huge decision support from everything the AI collected so that they can just dot the I's and cross the T's and probe for complexity and then make that final decision.
I love this, man. I'm learning such a huge amount here. Like I said, the nuance of just that decision in language, SomX are obsessed with language. We think you might need help with, and then the collection of symptoms, that's indisputable. Because you even said might. It's not as if you need help because you're flawed. It's you might need help, or you might want help. Like these small attention to detail nuances make all the difference in a patient interaction. And this is one thing that I think clinicians are worried about with AI, is that when you think of AI in the abstract, it's delivering it's doing a consultation, it's delivering a diagnosis, and okay, it's not saying what the actual diagnosis is, but it's going to redirect you to the clinician's going to be like, oh God, they're going to be worried, they're going to be concerned, they don't really know what's going on, or they've been told this thing, or like da-da-da. Actually, what do you know what this podcast so far has done for me, Ross? It's actually made me a little bit embarrassed as some of the things that I've said previously about the deployment of AI. And I think without the knowledge and the understanding of the actual practical delivery of this, I think it's actually relatively impossible to comment, because I do still believe that you're an outlier in the attention to detail on this. I think that's one of the advantages of being in this, at least since 2019 when we last spoke, that you've worked a lot of this out. But I think that's also based a lot on your own morality and ability as a founder. I would like to talk to you more about this. I'd like to do a part 2 on this. I think treatment is a whole nother ball game that I would love to get into with you.
Let's make this part 1 and we'll do a part 2.
I will say this, it has been an absolute pleasure so far. We'll pick this up next time, and we'll do this again. So I appreciate you coming on, Ross. And for people listening, join in for part 2.
Likewise, James. Catch you soon.